legacy of political fiction. This is the voluntary prisoners of OMA. But I think that Haydick's work in particular, as I suggest in the other image, becomes another way to think about the characteristic communities or collectives with the narratives that go with them that start to produce a different model of architecture and, let's say, collective fiction in these characteristic shapes. I think it's exactly the project that's been inherited also by someone like Joop van Lieshout. This is Slave City in terms of a political fiction, and maybe on another register as another version of the cartoon. This is Fat's Community Center in Hoekvliet, which is also, let's say, how to produce a fictional community where it didn't exist before. In other words, rather than a critical regionalism, you could say, it's really what you might call a projective regionalism. In other words, its view of territoriality isn't something that's of the place, but it's actually a projected fiction on it. And so, you know, if we want to change from Ken's critical regionalism to projective regionalism, this would be one version of the new form of territorialization that we're interested in. Thank you. How about if the room gets light? You want to marry the opposition I set up. Everybody wants to overcome before they, work through. Before you're even done setting up a taxonomy, all of a sudden everybody wants to undo it. I think that they're just totally different ontological projects, let's say, in terms of an understanding of the world, and for us, the discipline. And I would say that, to me, because I think that architecture is a cultural discipline, it's not about facts, it's about values, and therefore it's about choices, not necessities. And that, our job is to further the possibility of choice in the world, and not to assume that we are modeling a necessity or a fact. And I think that the concern with conditions, with, frankly, other things that one is interested in, like datascapes and all that, has led to a point of somehow a belief that the research is true, when in fact the point of those researchers was always to project another universe, like Borges' encyclopedia. In other words, it wasn't, I'm going to go find the facts in the world and bring them back. It was always, I'm going to go find a world that arranges things politically, economically, environmentally, socially different than the way this world is organized, and show that that's also a viable way of organizing the world, even though it might be laughable and comic to those from the other point of view, let's say, or the other world. So, to me, the idea of architecture as a kind of set of language games or counterfactuals or alternatives, the ism world, to me, which we've lost, and maybe John's dissertation subject was the great last ism maker, Charles Jenks. And so for this, I also applaud Charles Jenks. He invented a movement a minute and let the evidence come later. The idea is you name the thing first, and then work will, name it and they will build. And I think that the IDI world, it's just a totally, I'm not sure how you mean that they could be kind of adequated or combined in a way. I think the ism world, because in a certain way you can't argue with a condition, right? We're in the condition of modernity. You can't be for it or against it, you're in it. And so if you talk the language of condition, it suggests that there's no outside. If you talk the language of ism, immediately it's drawing up battle lines, and the idea is that this is a cultural, political discourse and debate and discussion, and you can join it as a member of an audience, but you're not in it de facto as a constituency.
Thank you so much. It was a really enjoyable talk, and I am disappointed that you didn't continue on with the cartoon plan. But I found there...
I'm coming back, right?
Please do. But I found there to be a lot of similarity with the maybe introduction of cartoon plan and the way that things started to come together at the conclusion of the lecture. And something that has always been problematic for me is that I think you addressed really well is that maybe the parametricism, if you will, always takes its forms, or maybe its design cues based on facts or presumed facts that get superimposed into a situation that is then formalized. And what is exciting about maybe the graphic or the cartoonism, and in the last example of the fact building, is that it really is this, it's not a combination of external forces, but it is this active reimagining of the world that has a particular identity that is also very imagined. And I wonder if you could speak maybe a little bit about more of that, how those imagined worlds get formatted, because I think with the Paramisms or the Zaha Hadid's work, that there's a kind of relinquishing of how that form comes to be, and it doesn't have the same sort of energetic or totalitarian envisioning of what the imagined world might be that I find exuberating or very exciting in a cartoonism.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that, maybe back to the two pavilions in a way, the Zaha and the UN studio. I mean, the criticism of local critics and architects was that these people are not of Chicago and therefore they can't do Chicago architecture. So Chicago is seen as an ideal thing. Zaha's position might be, but I have discovered the precise forces here, and I will model them and give them back to you in a way that doesn't look like the ideal version of Chicago. I think that Ben's version is the project of Chicago, which is what I'm calling diagrammatic, meaning that it's a set of traits or relationships that is, not stuck in the ideal vision of Chicago, nor the particular facts of a local circumstance at that moment, in terms of that idea of regionalism. So it's not a regionalism of look, and it's not a regionalism of somehow documenting all the functional forces and flows and requirements. But nonetheless, that, to me, the project of Chicago that I'm trying to basically expose, part of it's the cartoon project, part of it is the idea of the city as a plastic existence, that somehow, Chicago invented the futures market. Chicago is not exactly the aw shucks, authentic city that they imagine themselves to be, the humble, earnest Midwesterners. That in fact it was a totally corrupt, artificial set of, both formal planning operations, turning the river around, occupying the lake with landfill and in other words, the idea of how Chicago operates as a global diagram is not local to Chicago. It's something that you can see that in Asia, the Middle East, and everywhere else. Like Chicagoism, as a thing, as a project, is larger than a site. And so, I think that Ben taps into that the transportability of that diagram or that ism